Hello and welcome to this UK Shared Prosperity Fund workshop. This is a shortened version of the one that was presented on the 18th of April to around about 20 stakeholders from Rochford. And in this, we're going to give you a brief overview of the programme. We're going to talk to you a little bit about Rochford, the funding and the grant programme, the timelines, so you know what they are. We're going to go through in some detail the application form, so you can think about it in terms of your project and some next steps. I'm Erica Russell. I'll be taking you through the first section of this presentation, and my colleague Selene Dawson, also of Russell & Dawson, will be taking you through the second part. So, very briefly, just a little bit of background on UKSPF funding. All local authorities have been allocated this, and it's part of the government's levelling up agenda. The government has created 3 investment priorities: communities in place, supporting local business, people and skills. And sitting underneath each of these are a range of different interventions, and this is what we'll be looking at today. To be given the £1 million worth of funding, which has been allocated to Rochford, they were required to prepare and submit an investment plan, and it's the basis of that investment plan that forms the grant programmes you'll see coming up. There are the programme is over 3 years. In year 1, 75,000. Year 2, which is the one we're in now, the financial year 23-24, around about 150,000. And as you can see, the programme is very much backloaded to year 3 with just over £750,000. The interventions that Rochford have selected after stakeholder engagement are E1, town centres, intervention E4, culture and heritage, and intervention E23, which is around business support. And the council have opted to put about 70% of year 2, this year's allocation, into grant programmes for local organisations. And they're looking at interventions E1 and E4, so town centres, culture and heritage institutions. The government is very clear that the competition for projects is the default position for selecting recipients of public grants, so you will be applying, and there will be a review process alongside a scoring process to decide who is awarded grants. You can see below the amount of funding that's available for grants for these 2 interventions this year, and you can see there that there is both capital and revenue, and obviously most of that funding is within the revenue area. UKSPF is a completely new funded programme from government, and we would really strongly suggest you might want to have a look at the prospectus and also the outputs and outcomes definitions. It's something we'll come on to a little bit later. Just to give you a quick idea of the timeline, obviously the first workshop on the 18th of April, we will be looking for draft applications to be submitted by Tuesday the 9th of May, and earlier than that if you have them available. And this is really to support you and to provide some extra feedback before you put in your final application. Final applications must be submitted by the 19th of May and by noon. And then there will be an independent grant panel meeting on the 31st of May to actually review all of these. And you will find out by the 1st of June whether you've been awarded, whether you need to do some award but with some revisions, or if you sadly have been rejected. And the funding agreement should be out by the middle of June. First thing you need to think about is UKSPF funding right for you and your project, so your organisation and your project? You must think about whether you fit within these different interventions. If your project is something completely different, it just won't pass through the process, and the grant panel won't be able to approve it. So think about the funding for improvements to town centres, high streets. That's E1, and we provide a few examples here of the sort of things you might be thinking about. For E4, here you're looking at support for existing cultural, historic and heritage institutions. And these might be local natural assets as well as actual physical building assets as well. So again, some examples of areas that you might want to think about or might sort of fit your project ideas. And these are just examples, but they give you a bit of a feel for what government is considering. Also very important is this idea that whilst you might have some outputs and outcomes that you want to deliver very specifically about the work that you have in mind, UKSPF funding also requires that you meet certain government outputs and outcomes, and the council must report back on these. So what we've shown here on this slide is for each intervention, the outputs and the outcomes. Now you will be asked to meet at least one output and one outcome per intervention. And it's important that you understand what these actually mean to think about how they could fit into your project. And it may be that actually none of these are relevant, it doesn't work with your project, in which case, we would strongly suggest you need to think about, is this funding right for you? Again, very important to look at the definitions that the government has provided. So if you feel that your outputs and outcomes, at least one of these works, and you feel that the intervention is right for you, then I would suggest you then start to think about the project. Very importantly, you need to apply as an organisation. Unfortunately, government will not open this up to individuals. So you might be a registered charity, a registered business. You might be an organisation with a constitution and governance documents that you can provide. That's fine, but you need to be an organisation. You don't have to be based in Rochford, but the project must be delivered in Rochford itself, and government actually require postcodes for the sites that are where delivery is occurring. So this is very important to them. The grant value will be between 5,000 and 15,000 for this coming financial year, 23-24. And you might have a much bigger project, or you might have extra funding that you can add to a project to make it bigger. That's absolutely fine. As we said before, we'll be offering support to help with the application form. You will be getting written feedback on your draft, and hopefully that will help you with anything you're not too sure about. And there will be a grant panel that reviews the final applications. When you start the application form, we really strongly suggest that you bring up the guidance document. Now this, along with all the forms with links to government information, is all available on the Rochford website on the UKSPF page. The guidance document will take you through each of the questions, and really pretty much as we're going to do now, will give you answers and help on how you should complete them. The first one is describing your project. Now, I often leave this one to the last if I'm actually looking at an application form, because sometimes it's actually better to sit down and think about your budget, to think about your milestones, your timeline, what you're going to do. And actually, once you've got those in place, it can sometimes be easier to go back and write about your project. We want to know what you're going to be doing, where it's going to be delivered, who it's aimed at, and how you're going to deliver it. So that might be the volunteers you'll be using. It might be what kind of staff you'll have available. You need to think about and describe how it fits with the UKSPF intervention that you're responding to. And also, very importantly, you need to make sure that it actually includes the outputs and outcomes that will be delivered. This is the UKSPF outputs and outcomes. So embed those into your delivery and explain when, how many, and just make it clear that you've built that into your project outline. There are local priorities that Rochford District Council also want to see supported by UKSPF, and they've helpfully provided in the guidance a list of all of those that they are keen to see supported. Now, I don't think you'll be able to deliver on all of those, but we'd strongly suggest that you pick out the ones that are most relevant and then just respond to those points. So, investing in stimulating growth, well, you might have a particular area that you're doing, so just write down how that's actually happening. Not looking at pages and pages, 2 or 3 paragraphs on most of these questions is sufficient. Project outline might be a little bit more. The next question is, how do you know the community need or want this project? The grant panel want to understand this when they're looking at how they score your project. Some people might have statistics, some people might have a lot of data, but just showing that you've talked to the community and local partners, perhaps you've surveyed your membership, perhaps you've surveyed visitors. It's just showing how you've thought about those local needs in the way that you've shaped your project. So practical answers, but this is an important question. Also, Rochford and government, as you are fully aware, are committed to equality and diversity, and you need to show how your project will also support equality and diversity. So think about it in terms of your own organisation, how that actually works through into the project, and it could be how you're going to communicate, both in perhaps how you are thinking about the people you want to engage with, but also how you communicate equality and diversity to those you are working with. We also want to know how your project's going to operate sustainably. So this is around the environment, climate change, reducing carbon emissions. So perhaps outlining how you do that within your own organisation could be helpful, in how you're going to build that into the project that you're going to run. Might be about thinking about travel to venues, travel to sites, car sharing. It could be about the building that you operate, but also about how you engage with the community as well on this issue. We've seen some creative projects who've actually incorporated climate change into some of their creative activities. Quite a tough one. Question 7 is about project legacy. And here we're really trying to get a feel for, if this project is delivered in Rochford, what kind of long-term impact can it have? Can the project continue? Can it be continued through the work of volunteers that you've set up and supported? Is it something more fixed that is going to be available for a long period of time? So very useful to be able to think about that. It's a hard question. And moving on to the sort of more project and program side of it, delivering risks. Delivering always has risks. Some of these I'm sure that you're quite comfortable with. You may do this work quite regularly. You might be incorporating DBS checks, this kind of thing. So as well as the risks that you can kind of see with your normal everyday work around these projects, the panel will also want to see that you've understood that there could be risks with this funding stream as well. So we know that you have to collect evidence to demonstrate that you've met outputs and outcomes. You have to keep financial information to show that you have spent the money in the way that you have, that your procurement has worked. So we would also suggest you think about these kind of risks. You may have match funding risks. You may also have risks around administrative time and expertise. So think about the project as a whole, rather than perhaps just the actual main delivery focus. We talked about outputs and outcomes. As part of the application form, you will need to put down the number and then how you're going to collect and evidence the data. Here, whether it's for E1 or E4, think about this in sort of quite practical terms, but please refer back to the outputs and outcomes definitions, because it does give you some guidance on what government is expecting. And all of these have to be reported back by RDC to government in their reporting as well. So here we have the outputs and outcomes for E1. Remember, a minimum of 1 output, 1 outcome. And for E4, exactly the same format. And again, 1 output, 1 outcome minimum. But if you can do more, that's excellent. In terms of administration, you will need to provide a report on project progress, including your outputs and outcomes, every 3 months and at the end of the project. You need to make sure that you've got the time and expertise to do that, and it's very helpful to explain how you're going to manage this. And this isn't just financial. You will need to keep records of perhaps events that you've run. You might decide that you need to have photographs of those. You might have, people might sign up for it and you need to download that information. So it's not just financial, but obviously finance will play a part in this as well. Perhaps put in the name or the role of somebody who'll be responsible for this. That can also be very useful. Milestones, timeline. This will be available on a separate spreadsheet. This isn't on the Word document that you'll download for the main application, and it's the first tab. Here we want you to think about what's going to be delivered when, and it could be that you actually need quite a bit of work to set up a project, so that might take up several lines. You might be doing different things over the first 3 or 4 months. It could be that you have a series of events, show when those happen, And if you can, try and show where your outputs and outcomes will also occur, so that it helps when you're thinking again about your project delivery and your budget. Do these all tie together? And now I will hand over to Selene to talk about budget.
So here on question 12, you need to indicate your budget between each intervention, but also split between capital and revenue funding. It is possible that your answer may be a 0 on E4 if you're only working on E1 and vice versa. So it's not a problem. You can either choose to work on 2 interventions or just 1. In order to fill in this question on the Word document, you will need to first fill in the Excel spreadsheet. So the Excel spreadsheet is comprised of the timeline. As you can see, Erica's just talked about it, but also there are 3 additional tabs around the budget. The budget summary tab, which we are looking at, will give you the answers to question 12. And this is where your budget is divided between quarters and intervention, and then as well between interventions and revenue and capital funding. This tab doesn't need to be filled in. It's automatically calculated thanks to the formulas. But in order to get this tab filled in, you will need to fill in either budget for E1 or budget for E4 or both tabs, depending on what your project is. So this is an example of what you will see on your Excel spreadsheet. So you can see here we've got budget for E1. The column A, please select budget line by using the drop-down list. This is, you click on the drop-down list, and this is where you're going to choose what budget line you will be working on. I'm going to go through each budget lines. Just to indicate, you know, what cost usually will be under which budget line. So the first one is staff cost. This is the time spent on the project by your employees. When we say employee, these are people that you've got a contract of employment with and that receive pay slips from your organization. Staff travel cost is related to those people that are your employees and that need to claim their costs relating to, for instance, going to a specific venue for an event or for a meeting. And here you will include either mileage or maybe they've taken a bus or a train, so you need to include this cost in there. Applicant time if not an employee. So this is, for instance, yourself. You're part of an organization. You may be the director of this organization. You are not an employee because this is not how you work with organization. You may be a sole trader usually or self-employed. And here is where you can include your time to deliver the project. For instance, as part of your project, you will deliver workshops. This is where you indicate your time. The budget line supplier of goods. This is for costs such as we've put example here of craft supplies, banners, chairs, any goods that you may need to deliver your project and that you will be purchasing for the project. It could be as simple as buying some refreshments as well directly. Supplier of services. Again, this is a service provided onto your project from an external provider or contractor. It could be that you request a marketing agency or a marketing specialist to do social media for you or design some marketing tools. It could be that you've got artists where you want to work on a project, someone to deliver a workshop. It could be a tournament organizer or an event organizer. Anyone that is not employed by your organization and you need to pay them for their services. Volunteers expensive. So this is for volunteers that work on your project and you would like to reimburse their costs for travel and subsistence. So this is where you can budget for this cost. Small equipment, we've indicated here, could be laptop, printer, mobile phone, tablet, any pieces of equipment that are cost less than £5,000 and are absolutely required to deliver your project. All of these budget lines I've just mentioned are revenue costs. The last one, which is called capital cost, this is the budget line for instance, refurbishment refurbishment work. So it could be that you would like to refurbish a room in a venue, in a building, and it's an asset, and that is going to make a difference for the years to come. It could be equipment which cost over £5,000. So some of the equipment could be, for instance, a big 3D printer that costs more than £5,000. This will be a capital cost, not a revenue cost. Once you've selected your budget lines in your drop-down list, you will also need to fill in column B, which is for each budget line and each item of expenditure. You need to describe what the item is, the expenditure is for. So, for instance, for staff, you will use a line per member of staff, and you will include their job title, their role in the project, the number of hours they are going to work on the project. If you're looking to have a supplier of services, and then you'll indicate, for instance, doing marketing, creating a logo, anything that you would like to describe for the service you're going to require. It's important that you indicate as much details as you can, so that the ground panel can understand your project, what expenditures, but also we will be able to provide advice if we feel that maybe it's indicated in the wrong budget line. Once you've described the expenditure, we will then indicate how much the cost in each of the quarters on the right-hand side. And please make sure that it's linked to your timeline and it fits within your project delivery activities. Once budget for E1 and or budget for E4 is filled in, you will then go back to your budget summary. This will be automatically updating as you fill in your project and your budget, and then you'll be able then to go back to question 12 on the Word application and fill in the answers. Question 13. This is about the match funding. So this question is not scored. This is just for indication, really to understand your project, understand the risks linked to them. And here you can see that you will indicate whether the match funding is available already. So when I say match funding, for instance, if your project costs £20,000, you're actually asking for £15,000 of UKSPF funding. We don't need to know the details of the £5,000, but we would like to know if the funding is secured already, if you're planning on applying to another funders for this £5,000, and if maybe if you've got a plan, really. So if you select the amount on the right-hand side of the table, you indicate the amount, and then at the additional comments, you just let us know a little bit more about where the money is coming from and whether it's secured or not, and from who. Question 14 is, again, it's not a scored question, but it's an important one, because here we want to make sure that there are the least risks as possible in terms of procurement. So procuring external goods and services has got rules according to the UKSPF funding. These are the UK public sector procurement rules, and it's very important that you follow them, because these will be attached to the funding and therefore applicable to yourself. Here you can see direct award for any cost under 2,499. Just need to have one quote. Then there are different rules for 2,500 to 24,999, and this is where you need to show that you've requested 3 quotes from different suppliers. And then possibly something less applicable to you, but please keep an eye on it, is anything above £25,000 will need to undertake a tender, which has got more restrictions. It's important that you look at the guidance and look at the rules, and then make sure that in question 14 you answer about what you think will be applicable to yourself and for what type of cost, so that we make sure that this is understood and they are the least risk possible. How to manage your VAT. So you will confirm whether you're VAT registered or not. If you are VAT registered, you will need to exclude any VAT from your budget and your claims if you get approved, because UKSPF will not pay recoverable VAT. If you're not VAT registered, then feel free to include all costs, and including VAT. because this will be an acceptable cost. If you're not VAT registered, then feel free to include all costs and including VAT. Next steps. So as we said earlier, everything will be available from the 20th of April. That includes the application form, the guidance, the information document, budget spreadsheet, timeline spreadsheet, and this short video. There will also be an FAQ sheet that will be updated with your questions. Any queries, you can email the UKSPF@rochford.gov.uk email address, or you can call the following number. Key dates, 9th of May is when we would like to really have received your draft application by. You will then get your feedback, and we would like the final submission to be done by the 19th of May. Following this, there will be a process of scoring, and a ground panel will look at all of the application form and discuss the programs that should be approved or not. You will be notified of the outcome for your application on the 1st of June, and we are hoping that all projects will be ready to start by the 1st of July. Thank you very much.